What's the most awkward situation you've ever been in? Okay, so me and some friends were at a restaurant and a buddy of mine was telling us about this new girl he just started going out with a few days back. Well, another friend started telling us about this girl that he banged the previous night. The conversation went on for a minute and finally somebody asked for the name of the girl that he had banged, and it turns out it was a girl that the other friend had started dating a few days earlier. Q narrowly avoided fight as we convinced him it's better to find out she's shitty now rather than later. The two guys still no longer speak though. Was unexpectedly in the car ride with my boyfriend's parents on their way to sign their divorce papers. Kind of similar vein. My last ex before my husband wanted to stay friends even though we had a messy breakup and I left him. I thought he would want me to duck off, but he kept insisting that we still hang out as friends. Out of guilt I obliged. Over time he started seeing someone else and then he still kept getting me to hang out with them. I couldn't tell if things were getting more weird or less weird, so I obliged. One evening I'm hanging out with my ex, Bill, at their place when his GF, Tammy, comes home from work and looks kinda nervous. Before I know it, she launches into this story about having just hooked up with a coworker as I'm desperately wishing to GTFO. My ex was visibly upset and they had a huge fight about it right in front of me. During the fight it also came out that they had been trying to groom me for a threesome. That was the last time I saw them. But they are still together. When I was a kid my family's van broke down, so we all had to squeeze into my dad's car to go to a funeral. Anyways, my older sister had to sit on my lap. Yep, you guessed it. I got a boner and she freaked out and started screaming. I would just cut all contact with everyone and go live in the forest for the rest of my life. Man'd just crawl right into that grave next to grandpa. Had a good run. Pep pep, but I popped a boner with my sister on my lap. I guess life just isn't my thing. When I was a kid, we were on holiday and decided to go to a church. While we were there I decided that I would be funny if I would slap my dad's butt with both hands. So I ran in full speed. To maximize the impact of the slap, I ended up slapping a stranger who also happened to walk next to a woman with a stroller in his hands, which made me think it was my dad. It was even worse that my parents saw it as well. I once followed a man out of a grocery store, across a small parking lot, and tried to get into his car with him because I thought it was my dad. Didn't figure out my mistake until I saw him look across the top of the car at me, trying to get into the passenger side, with a super confused look on his face. Cue my actual dad running up breathlessly, waving his hands, and yelling at me. One time in college, I snuck into Myra's room and hid under the blanket on his top bunk. My goal was to scare him when he came in and settle down a bit. He ended up coming in with his girlfriend and began making out with her. After a good lifetime couple moments, I jumped up and ran out. No saving it. I was looking at my mom's phone cause she wanted to show me some pictures from what she did that weekend. I swiped one too many times and came across one of her nudes. I felt my soul jolt out of my body seeing that shit. My mom added me to her Google photo album, then forgot. You can guess the rest. I was a teenager with a boner. Pretty standard so far. I walked downstairs and had to tuck it in my pajamas, so the head is sticking straight up and the erection is pinned against the body, so the boner isn't noticeable. Well, when I put my t-shirt on it fell behind the tip, so if you looked at my wasit line you could clearly see the tip of my penis. I was talking to my mom for a few minutes and she was flushed red in the face and quickly trying to kill conversation. Not something my mom is known for. I walked away, saw what was going on, and didn't know what the hell to do. We never discussed it, but because things were so awkward at dinner, I'm pretty sure my mom knew that I realized it happened as well. I was at a funeral for one of my husband's relatives. On my way in, an employee of the funeral home asked me when I was due. I wasn't pregnant, but I'm fat and was wearing an Empire waistcoat, so I wasn't offended. As I signed the goose book I corrected her and tried to defuse the situation with a joke about burning that coat later. But she just wouldn't stop. She kept trying to apologize and explain herself, and I just wanted to run away. Then I was stuck in a small room with her for the next 2 hours. I was riding in the passenger seat with my mom, who has always been strict and very tight-knit several years ago, when for some reason she decided to completely open up to me about all of her drug experimentation and sexual exploits in the 60s, and the time she did cocaine with Steve Jobs at a fancy restaurant in the 80s. It was a very uncomfortable eye-opener, and I was trapped listening to it. Her mom did cocaine with Steve Jobs. Her ex-husband was an executive with the firm that managed Apple's first large-scale ad campaign. After the first Macintosh launch, they went out to a 5-star restaurant in LA and railed lines of blow under the table apparently. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that knowledge. Okay, I already posted in this thread, but I remembered something even worse. When I was in 2nd grade, my brother and I would always be picked up after school by my dad. We had a green van with a red stripe on the side. So my brother grabs my hand and storms us up to the car. He rips open the door, sits us down, buckles me in, and then says, "Can we get McDonald's on the way home?" We both look up and there is 2 middle-aged adults sitting in the front seat that are obviously not our family. They stare at us, we stare at them. In my little brain we've been staring at each other for at least 10 minutes at this point. My brother unbuckles me, unbuckles himself, we get out and walk away. No words were exchanged. We then checked who was in the car before getting in from that point forward. Edit. Thank you so much for the gold and silver. I'm going to ask my brother if he remembers this lol. So, I'm gonna need a yes or a no on that McDonald's. I was sitting in class and the kid next to me farted, and I said "God bless you," as if it were a sneeze. That should be a thing. Not awkward for me, but I was the reason for it. I served for a couple years and worked multiple restaurants in that time frame. I worked at a Denny's, night shift, best and worst job for many reasons. Anyways, there was a regular that came in often, drunk as a skunk and nasty as hell. He tipped really well, but was so nasty to us girls. It never fazed me, so I served him often. He offered many times to pay for extra service and tried to get me to leave with him often. Of course I never did, but a couple months later in working a new place, little more high end, I work mornings here, and this was a Sunday morning church rush. Guess who was sat in my section? My nasty regular from my last job with his entire family. His wife, kids, parents, the whole group, fresh out at church. The look on this man's face when I walked up and said hello. He was red as a fire truck, and I made it worse by asking if he remembered me. He left me a huge tip, probably because I didn't bring up his nasty mouth and grabby hands from his late drunken nights. Edit. I was a waitress. That's what I meant by serving***. When I was a kid I hugged a random dude because I thought it was my dad. Even better how this dude's son was standing next to him. You established yourself as his new son, asserting dominance early on. This poor girl walked into my lecture by mistake about halfway through. This particular professor really enjoys talking to all of his students and was super engaging even with 400+ students in his class. When the girl walked in, my professor stopped teaching, looked at the girl, and asked if she was in the class. She said she was, and began walking towards the front, where the open seats were. This is a fairly large lecture hall and all 200 students, approximate how many actually show up to class, were now forced to watch this poor girl walk towards a seat because the professor didn't continue talking and just stared at her. She got close to the front and I think the pressure of the whole room got to her and she said, "Actually no I'm not," and turned around, and we all had to watch this poor girl climb back up the stairs and out of the hall. I was literally watching my worst nightmare. My 79-year-old mother-in-law with Alzheimer's telling us that she had had sex the previous night with another resident of her nursing home. She had been celibate for 20 years up until then. We think. Boss of mine worked in a retirement home. Apparently, they have a huge STD problem in those homes, because why wear protection when your ovaries don't work? The bright side is, if you're a virgin all you have to do is wait till you're old and decrepit, get put in a home, buy tons of Viagra, and get your game on. My best friend waiting to tell her parents that she's gay until when I was over for dinner. How was the food though? Good. They had spaghetti. You know, a noodle that is straight until it gets hot and wet, then it's covered in balls and sauce. Last summer my wife and I were browsing for random crap in Pier 1. I'm wandering around the store aimlessly and see my wife kneeling down inspecting some merchandise on the bottom shelf. I approach her from behind, slightly tap the top of her head, and go boop. It was not my wife, just someone who looked almost exactly like her from the back. She looks up at me. All I managed to say was, "Oh, I thought I was married to you. Sorry." What was your most awkward moment ever? Share it with us in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Have a wonderful day my fellow people.